What happens when the most savage fight organization in the world suddenly looks soft, or worse, out of control? From Conor McGregor's bus attack to Dana White being caught on camera slapping his wife, and a $375 million court loss, these are the moments that made the UFC look weak. Chapter 1. The Brooklyn Bus Attack. It's not the title of a blockbuster action crime movie. On April 5, 2018, it was all too real. The drama began shortly after a UFC 223 media event at the Barclays Center in Brooklyn. Conor McGregor, furious and fired up, showed up uninvited. His target, Khabib Nurmagomedov, the undefeated Dagestani champion and longtime rival. The trigger was a confrontation between Khabib and Artem Lobov, a close friend and training partner of McGregor's. Days earlier, Lobov had criticized Khabib in a Russian interview, accusing him of repeatedly pulling out of fights and calling him a coward. Khabib didn't take that lightly. When he crossed paths with Lobov in New York, he confronted him aggressively, grabbing him by the neck and slapping him. The video of the incident quickly went viral. When McGregor saw the footage, he didn't wait. He and his crew boarded a private jet and flew straight to New York. On arrival, McGregor and his entourage stormed the Barclays Center, allegedly aided by employees from the Mac Life, McGregor's own media company. Dana White later confirmed that these credentialed staff let the group into the building after hours. As the UFC fighters were boarding buses to return to their hotel, McGregor and his team found them in the loading dock. That's when McGregor picked up a steel dolly and hurled it through the window of a bus carrying Khabib and several other fighters. The glass shattered, multiple athletes were injured, chaos followed. The video of McGregor's attack went viral within minutes. Dana White called it the most disgusting thing that has ever happened in the history of the company. Police issued a warrant for McGregor's arrest. It wasn't just an act of hooliganism, it was criminal. This single act of violence blurred the line between fight promotion and felony assault, and it marked the beginning of a blood feud that would shake the UFC to its core. If the Brooklyn bus attack was the prelude, UFC 229 was the explosion. Chapter 2. UFC 229's Public Meltdown. Held on October 6, 2018, UFC 229 was supposed to be a celebration, the fight of the century. Conor McGregor versus Khabib Nurmagomedov, the biggest star in UFC history versus the undefeated Russian champion. The hype was unmatched, fueled by months of venomous trash talk, press conference face-offs, and the infamous dolly-throwing bus incident. The atmosphere in Las Vegas was electric. McGregor walked out with swagger. Khabib walked out with intent. When the cage door shut, the world held its breath. The fight itself was a clinical domination by Nurmagomedov. He wrestled McGregor into exhaustion and finally submitted him in the 4th round, but that was just the beginning of the madness. As soon as McGregor tapped, Khabib leaped over the cage and attacked McGregor's teammate Dylan Dennis in the crowd. Simultaneously, Khabib's team stormed the octagon and began fighting McGregor. The arena erupted into a full-blown brawl. What was supposed to be a showcase of elite martial arts descended into street-level chaos broadcast to millions. The Nevada State Athletic Commission immediately launched an investigation. Both fighters were suspended and hefty fines were handed out. Dana White condemned the incident publicly, but behind the scenes, the UFC leaned into the spectacle. Footage of the brawl became promotional gold. Highlight reels didn't shy away, they spotlighted the mayhem. Had the UFC lost control, or had it knowingly orchestrated this madness for profit? Either way, UFC 229 was no longer just a sporting event. It was a moment that shattered the UFC's image. Following that, a notable damage came very recently. Chapter 3. When the UFC exploited the violence. In February 2025, a US court officially approved a staggering $375 million settlement in a class action lawsuit that had been hanging over the UFC for nearly a decade. But this wasn't just about money, it was about power, control, and the way the UFC had allegedly been stacking the deck in its own favor for years. It started in 2014. Filed by former fighters like Kung Lei, John Fitch, and Nate Quarry, the lawsuit accused the UFC of monopolistic practices that underpaid athletes and controlled the MMA labor market. The court documents revealed a systematic approach by the UFC to corner the market, lock fighters into restrictive agreements, and manipulate rankings to favor specific narratives. Suddenly, the promotion that claimed to offer the best fighting the best looked like a puppet master pulling strings to keep power centralized. And finally, the court's approval of the settlement wasn't just a legal decision, it was a public confirmation that the UFC's grip on power had crossed the line. But if the courtroom exposed the UFC's outer walls cracking, an even more personal battle was raging within its own ranks. Chapter 4: Dollars and Disrespect. Yes, high-profile fighters like Francis Ngannou started openly speaking out about what they were, or more accurately, weren't being paid. Ngannou's contract dispute was particularly eye-opening. Despite being the heavyweight champion, he was reportedly making a fraction of what boxers in equivalent positions earned. He eventually walked away from the UFC entirely, choosing to sign with the PFL and even venture into professional boxing, where he faced Tyson Fury in a bout that paid him more than any UFC fight ever had. It was a crushing look for the UFC. The idea that one of their reigning champions felt so undervalued that he would abandon the biggest MMA platform in the world spoke volumes. As the fighter pay debate raged, another blow came from an unlikely source: power slap. Chapter 5: Power Slap. Dana White's highly publicized slap fighting league was met with widespread backlash and ridicule. Critics called it a brain damage showcase, and health professionals condemned it as exploitative and dangerous. Footage of competitors standing still and getting brutally slapped unconscious went viral for all the wrong reasons. Instead of elevating combat sports, it looked like a step backward, primal, reckless, and devoid of athletic merit. The optics were terrible. Many questioned how the same man who presided over a billion-dollar MMA empire could also be championing a format that lacked defense, strategy, or regulation. Power Slap's existence began to reflect poorly on the UFC, not just because of its content, but because it highlighted the organization's priorities. Was the UFC more interested in legitimate sports or viral brutality? Even UFC commentators like Joe Rogan distanced themselves from the project, and it became a running joke on MMA forums and podcasts. But that wasn't the end. Next up, a scandal so personal that haunted Dana White personally for years. Chapter 6: The Cabo Controversy. A New Year's Eve video surfaced showing White slapping his wife during an argument at a nightclub in Cabo San Lucas. The incident, caught on camera and widely circulated online, ignited a firestorm of criticism. Domestic violence is no small matter, especially in a company where fighters have been released or disciplined for similar actions. Yet Dana White remained at the helm, issuing some public apology, but facing no real consequences. The hypocrisy was glaring. For an organization that had once cut ties with fighters like Jason High and Thiago Silva over out-of-cage behavior, the lack of disciplinary action against White reeked of double standards. Media outlets picked up on the contradiction, and the UFC faced accusations of a toxic culture and leadership favoritism. Whatever one's opinion, the message was clear: the rules did not apply equally, and accountability was selective at best. Chapter 7: PEDs and Privilege. If these controversies weren't enough, the spectre of performance-enhancing drugs returned to haunt the UFC when Conor McGragor re-entered the USADA testing pool after a suspiciously long absence. What made matters worse was the fact that the UFC eventually parted ways with USADA. The organization announced it would be using a new drug testing partner, but the timing, coming shortly after McGregor's test pool entry, felt suspicious. Was the promotion willing to bend the rules for its biggest stars? Even more troubling was the broader realization that the UFC, once seen as the gold standard in anti-doping, was now viewed as inconsistent and opportunistic. The departure from USADA shattered a level of trust that had taken years to build. From post-fight riots to legal battles, contract disputes, slap contests, and domestic violence scandals, these moments didn't just hurt the UFC's image, they cracked the illusion of invincibility. These issues reveal the real problems behind the scenes. Unless things change, we have to ask, is the UFC still the best in fighting, or just good at looking that way? Let's wait and see if they actually change. Drop your thoughts in the comments, and we'll discuss.